So today, the Roman government in Israel has failed. And it's not surprising to me. I'll give you my opinion, the reason why it has failed. I said it's my opinion, doesn't mean it's fact. All it means is my opinion. So let me go to screen share and we're going to get to it. All right, let's get rid of this. The Times of Israel. It says, the headline says, after failed talks with Lieberman, Netanyahu expected to announce re-election or election rerun. So if we go to IsraelNationalNews.com, the headline is, no agreements at Netanyahu-Lieberman meeting. Senior Likud officials say conversation ended in explosion. Haredi parties said they received signals elections would be held. This is right after an election back in April. And now, after this win by Benjamin Netanyahu and his right wing, as they say, coalition, they have failed. Now, a lot of reasons, a lot of excuse making has been passed around. The main one is the Haredi parties. They don't want to be drafted. They don't want their young men to be drafted, young men and women to be drafted into the military. And Avigdor Lieberman's party wants everybody to be drafted, and he will not be. He's not going to compromise on that at all, and apparently neither are the Haredi parties. So, and that is the reason. But wait a minute. A few weeks ago, on this very YouTube channel, of course, I warned Benjamin Netanyahu concerning his promise that he made. Now, I know that this is the least watched, this is the least listened to YouTube channel there is, okay? And I don't believe for a minute that the Likud party watches this channel, but the warning still went out. You see, Benjamin Netanyahu made a promise. He promised that if elected, that he would, for all intents and purposes, annex the settlement portions of Judea and Samaria. Let me see if I can find that. Let's see. What is on this thing? Close Israeli law on Judea and Samaria. Now, you can go to any of these publications, whether it be CBN.com, LATimes.com. We'll go to this one. If you notice what the dates are, April 7, April 6, April 7. All right. Netanyahu pledges to annex or put Israeli law on to say West Bank is not correct. It's Judea and Samaria if he wins another term as prime minister. Well, he did win another term. The very first thing that he should have done after winning the election is to carry out his promise. He could have done it as prime minister. He could have done it. And furthermore, I will tell you, if he would have done this first, if he would have done it first, he would have unified his coalition partners, and they would have been more willing to get along with each other on a united front. I warned on this YouTube channel that if he makes light of this promise, that he might be, worst case scenario, end up like Ariel Sharon, or even worse, like Yitzhak Rabin. You do not make promises like this and not keep them when it comes to the Holy Land. That's just something you do not do. He failed. He failed to keep his promise. And what this points out, what this illustrates, is that the Israeli government is actually, the current Israeli government is a Roman-styled government. And all Roman-styled governments, folks, are destined to fail. It is biblical. It is modeled after the Roman way of governing. What was the Roman way of governing? Well, it started with the Greeks. Words that came from both the Greek and the Romans are democracy and republican. That's correct. Let me remind you, let me point this out. I've done this before. Let's see. See if what I can pull up here. The history of democracy, Wikipedia. Democracy is a political system or a system of decision-making within an institution or organization of a country in which all members have an equal share of power. Modern democracies are characterized by two capabilities differentiate them fundamentally from earlier forms of government: the capacity to intervene in their own societies and the recognition of their own sovereignty by an international legalistic framework of similar sovereign states. The democratic government is commonly juxtaposed with oligarchic and monarchic systems, which are ruled by a minority and a sole monarch, respectively. Democracy is generally associated with the efforts of the ancient Greeks and Romans, who were themselves considered the founders of Western civilization. By the 18th century, intellectuals who attempted to leverage these early democratic experiments into a new template for post-monarchical political organization. As you can see by now, folks, democracy, the term democracy, came from the ancient Greeks and Romans. And this is what the Israeli government calls themselves, a democracy. Well, if you read Daniel 2, you will realize that the democracies will all fail. Now, if you just, all you've got to do now is go look at the European election results from last night. The European Union has almost been turned upside down. According to what I read here, and other, you have to really look around in websites. Well, for instance, in Great Britain, Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn have been punished by British voters for their handling of Brexit and were dealt a humiliating blow at the European elections, with their parties suffering a defeat very hard to stomach. The Conservative and Labour parties witnessed a hemorrhaging of votes, with the former expecting to get less than 9% of the seats and the latter likely to only receive 14% of the support, as the vote counting is still underway. Well, the vote counting, I believe, has stopped. So this was from well, no, this wasn't from yesterday. I don't see that. I thought that the vote counting had ended this morning, but maybe it doesn't end until this evening. But what's happened is that the so-called right wing and the so-called left wing have dominated the elections in the EU, leaving the centrist parties not demolished, but without a majority. So the EU is right now in complete disarray, as is Great Britain, as is France. They're in complete disarray. It is a total disaster what happened in these elections. So going back to the Israeli situation, Netanyahu pledged to bring Jewish law to the settlements in Judea and Samaria if he was, in other words, if his coalition was elected. He didn't do it, therefore he broke his promise. He didn't do it. He made a promise. He deliberately. This was a deliberate lie on his part. He never intended to do it. And the reason why I know this is because while he was yet prime minister before this latest round of elections, parliamentarians in the Israeli Knesset 3 times introduced legislation to do that very thing. And he blocked it all 3 times. And then he made this promise, which he refused to deliver on. My personal opinion, this is the end of his political career. However, there's something else to look at here. We need to go to Daniel 2. Once again, I'm going to show everyone a few markers, what we need to look for when the overturning begins, when, as some say, the millennium begins. Daniel 2 is about Nebuchadnezzar having this dream of an image. And verse 31, he said, "You, O king, saw and beheld a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, and his breast and his arms of silver, and his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, and his feet part of iron and part of clay. And you saw that till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon the feet that were of the iron and clay, and broke them to pieces. And then was the iron, the clay, the brass, and the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and they became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away. Yes, their lands were emptied, and there was no place found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, which is Mount Zion, and filled the whole earth. The government of Mount Zion ruled over the whole earth. This is the dream. And we will tell the interpretation there before the king. You, O king, you are a king of kings, for Jehovah has of heaven, or the Elohim of heaven, has given you a kingdom of power and strength and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven, he has given into your hand, has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. So the king of Babylon was the head of gold. And after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to you. That would be the Medo-Persian kingdom, the empire. And then a third kingdom of brass, which would be the Grecian empire, which will bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. That would be Rome. Strong as iron. For as much as iron breaks into pieces and subdues all things, and as iron breaks all these that came forward, it shall break in pieces and bruise. And whereas you saw the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Divided? Let's look at the word carefully. Let's make sure we don't leave any stone unturned. Divided. To divide. It means exactly what it says. Divided. Well, we see today, it most certainly is divided. What we just witnessed in the European elections was nothing short of absolute chaos and division. Not to mention World War II, World War I, anyone? Division. Now, but in it there shall be the strength of iron, for as much as you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet, so we're progressing toward the very end of this kingdom, which is where we are right now. We're part of iron and part of clay. And so the kingdom, or kingdoms, shall be strong and partly broken. And whereas you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Let's see here. I do believe, where did I see this? Well, I can't remember now, but there is a piece on IsraeliNationalNews.com, I believe it was. Let's see if I can find it there. It's probably already away from the headlines. There it is right here. The strange death of Europe and what it means for Israel. Well, it's a long read, but in it, he starts writing. This is by Douglas Murray. Okay, mass migration, particularly illegal immigration, has become perhaps a defining political crisis for the West. Concerns over such migrations helped catapult a reality television star into the White House and has divided. Didn't we just hear that word in Daniel 2? and has divided the European Union even more than the global financial crisis of the late 2000s and the subsequent austerity programs. While some have argued that the various crises stemming from recent waves of mass migration are a temporary aberration, British journalist and commentator Douglas Murray believes that the issue is here to stay and indeed will only grow in importance in the coming years. This is going to be the single biggest issue in an age where anyone can move anywhere. Uh-oh. That you can find in Daniel 12, where anyone can move anywhere. There's another marker. In fact, I'm going to keep Daniel 2, and I'm going to go to Daniel 12. Right? And it starts off in the very first verse, the time of the end. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which stands up for your people, the children of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble. That is the great tribulation upon the Gentiles. Why do I say it's upon the Gentiles? Because Daniel was told that the people of Israel will be delivered, which means the Gentiles won't. Therefore, it's the tribulation upon the Gentiles, such as never was since there was a nation even to that same time. And at that time, your people shall be delivered. And Paul accentuates that in Romans 11, verse 26. And so all Israel shall be saved, for out of Zion shall come the deliverer, and shall turn unholiness from Jacob. For this is my covenant with them, yes, the new covenant, when Jehovah shall take away their sins. I mean, you cannot get more black and white than that. Everyone. It says everyone that shall be found written in the book. Well, when you read it in Hebrew, it says Israel. All Israel is written in the book by default, unless they remove their name from the book, which some have. And some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Obviously, the ones who remove themselves, their name from that book, to everlasting contempt. Now, look, hold on, I'm not done. And they that are wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness, will shine like the stars forever and ever. But you, O Daniel, shut the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro. Now we have yet another marker. And this is exactly what is written here. Concerns over such migrations help catapult a reality television star into the White House, and has divided the European Union even more than the global financial crisis of late 2000 subsequent austerity programs. While some have argued that the various crises stemming from recent waves of mass migration are a temporary aberration, British journalist and commentator Douglas Murray believes the issue is here to stay and indeed will only grow in importance in the coming years. This is going to be the single biggest issue in an age where anyone can move anywhere. Yes, folks. There it is. One more marker. One more sign. As written in Daniel 12. Murray said in an interview with Channel 7, Murray came to Israel to participate in the Israeli Conservatism Conference, Murray's 2017 book, The Strange Death of Europe. Well, the Bible predicted this, did it not? In Daniel 2, of course it did. We just read about it. Strange Death of Europe, Immigration, Identity, Islam was recently translated to Hebrew and released in Israel, highlighting growing concern in Israel over mass migration and its political security ramifications. It is vital that an Israeli readership learn the depth of what currently is Europe's problem, because I think that in the years ahead, this is going to get infinitely more complicated. This country, Israel, has good reason to worry about Europe. Well, I say that Israel has no reason to worry about Europe. Europe was Israel's persecutor and will suffer the consequences as a result. Europe, they called themselves ecclesia, and they referred to Israel as synagoga, and they kept little synagogue down low and elevated themselves high, boasting against the branches of Israel, in violation of the words that Paul warned the Romans in the entirety of Romans 11. And now Europe must pay the price. Paul warned that the consequences would be severe for doing this. Go to Romans 11. Verse 11, I say then, have they, Israel, stumbled that they should fall? Jehovah forbid, but rather through their temporary setback, salvation is come unto the Gentiles for to provoke Israel to jealousy. Now, if the temporary setback of them be the riches of the world and the diminishing of them, you know, the little synagogue down low, be the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? And this right here is the part that the Gentiles reject, right here. They don't want Israel to be rebuilt, refilled. They don't want Israel to have the Holy Land. They want Israel to remain low so that they can walk all over Israel. Paul warned that was the wrong attitude to have. Now he says, I speak to you Gentiles, because I am the apostle of the Gentiles. I magnify my office. They reject that as well. They rejected the words of Paul, and they tried to claim Peter as their apostle, who Peter is not, never was the apostle to the Gentiles. Peter was merely one of the apostles for one of the tribes of Israel. If by any means I may provoke to emulation those who are of my flesh and might save some of them, that is in that particular generation where there was condemnation. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what then shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? The Gentiles, the Romans don't believe this. The receiving of Israel, life from the dead? They don't believe that. But there it is in black and white, the words of Paul himself, the only apostle to the Gentiles. Because if the first fruit is holy, the lump is also holy. In other words, you can't have the Messiah without having Israel. And I don't mean some sort of, as people would say, figurative, or they blaspheme when they say spiritual Israel. No, it's literal Israel. You cannot have a literal Messiah without literal Israel, period. Because if the first fruit is holy, the lump, Israel, is holy. And if the root of Jesse is holy, then so are all 12 branches, including Dan. Now, if some of them were temporarily broken off, and you, being of a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and you partake of the root of fatness of the olive tree, do not boast against the branches. What did Rome do? They not only boasted against the branches, they raped, pillaged, and murdered the branches. They went far above and beyond what Paul warned them not to do. It was much worse. But Paul's warning remains the same. But if you boast, you don't bear the root, but the root bears you. What he's saying is, if you boast against the branches, you're not boasting against the branches, you're boasting against the root. And indeed they did, because they changed the name of the Messiah from Yehoshua to a fake, false, demonic name. You will say, then the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in well. Because of unbelief they were broken off, and you now stand by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. Because if Jehovah didn't spare the natural branches back then, take heed lest he also spare you not either. Look at the goodness, and at the same time look at the severity of Jehovah. On them which fell severity, but toward you goodness, if you continue in his goodness. Otherwise, the same thing that happened to them is going to happen to you, Romans. And then Paul goes further. And they, Israel also, they will not still abide in unbelief. You can read that in Deuteronomy 30. It's written right there. They will no longer abide in unbelief. It's also written in Ezekiel 39. They will no longer abide in unbelief. They shall believe. They will. There is no ifs about it. Then they will be grafted in, because Jehovah is able to graft them in again. And if you were cut out of an olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, the 12 tribes of Israel, who are the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree, aka Zion, Eretz Israel, the Holy Land. They have a far greater chance than the Romans. That is the answer. And as you can read right here, verse 25, 26, 27, for I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Now, it is written in Luke, the time of the Gentiles comes to a full. What it means is there's coming a time when the time of the Gentiles is finished. Your time is up. There's no more time left. It's all about time, folks. It's all about time. And at that time, all Israel shall be saved, just as was written in Daniel 12. The time that all Israel is saved is the time of the Gentiles' tribulation. What tribulation? A tribulation like has never been since there was a nation, even until that time. Ever. The worst. And it's at that time, all Israel shall be saved. What then with the Gentiles? Well, by default, they won't be saved. Unless, of course, as is written in Joel 2, they call upon the name of Jehovah. But most Gentiles don't know the name of Jehovah. They have glommed onto false names like the Lord and Jesus, or Jesus, which does not mean Jehovah is salvation. Yehoshua is the only name that means Jehovah is salvation. As it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn unholiness from Jacob, for this is my covenant. What covenant? The covenant written in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 34, and the covenant written in Hebrews 8, verses 8 through 12, the new covenant. Unto them when I shall take away their sins. We read right here, concerning the gospel, they might be enemies for your sakes, Romans, but concerning the election, oh, that means they are the elect for the patriarchs' sakes, for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's sakes, and that cannot be taken away from them, because it says right here, because the gifts and the calling of Jehovah cannot be changed, or without repentance, cannot be changed. So the Roman governments of this world are in complete disarray and complete division. Israeli politicians need to look at Daniel 2 very, very carefully and realize what's going on here. Their government is patterned after the Roman government of clay, of iron, I should say, of iron. It is patterned after the Roman government, as we read in right here, History of Democracy. See, you can look at it. You can look it up. These are democracies are all originated from Gentiles, and so, as you can also read in Daniel 2, and in the days of these kings shall the Elohim of heaven, or the Elah of heaven, set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left to another people. Will not be left to the Romans. No. And it will break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. And whereas you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands. What mountain? Mount Zion. And that it broke in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, and the silver, and the gold, the great Elah has made known to the king what shall come here to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof is absolute. It's over. You see, folks, what we've got here is when it comes to the point at the tail end of this kingdom, the kingdom of the 10 toes, the tail end, where they finally, or some of them, maybe half of them finally come to a conclusion that they do not cleave to one another because iron does not mix with clay, which is what's happened. When it comes to this point, the only thing left is the next verse. And in the days of these kings shall the Elah of heaven set up a kingdom. That's all that's left. There is nothing left. Nothing. Now, as I pointed out in my other videos, Shavuot is a very special holy day. The Torah was given to Israel on Mount Sinai on Shavuot. The Holy Spirit came to the apostles and to the congregation on Shavuot, as written in Acts 2. The Messiah was conceived on the 6th month, which means he was born on the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. The only holy day in the month of Sivan, or the 3rd month on the Hebrew calendar, was, in fact, Shavuot. Israel got East Jerusalem back. On June 11, 1967, Shavuot, in the month of Sivan. Every single one of these events happened in the month of Sivan on Shavuot. It is written that a peace plan is going to be a trap that the Gentiles lay for Israel, and it's going to blow up in their face, just like I've showed previous videos concerning Isaiah 24, concerning Psalm 35, Psalm 69, verse 22, 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 3, and I believe Luke 12. All describe it as, let's see, it's not Luke 12, as a snare. 21 probably. Well, I'll have to use Google. Luke 21:35. I got it backwards. For as a snare it shall come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Okay? How is it going to come as a snare? They're going to say peace and safety. Paul got that from Psalm 69 and verse 22, if you care to read it. But also Isaiah 24 shows what happens when the Gentiles deal treacherously with Israel. They have broken the everlasting covenant. Their time is up. It's over. Peter in Acts 2 said, whether or not he knew that he was predicting the future or not really makes no difference. He said that the coming of the Holy Spirit was the prophecy that is written in Joel 2. Acts 2. And when the day of Pentecost, it just means 50th in Greek. Should read Shavuot. Was fully come. They were all in one accord in one place, and suddenly there came a sound out of heaven and a rushing mighty wind, and it filled the house where they were sitting, and there appeared unto them cloven tongues as of fire, and sat on each of them, and they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and began to speak with other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance. And those that were dwelling in Jerusalem, Jews, they were Jews, men of devout men, out of every nation under heaven, Jews out of every nation under heaven? Yes, because they were scattered into every nation under heaven. Well, you guess what, folks? The same thing is going to happen. A repeat. But the last one is going to be big. It's going to be a monstrosity. Now, when this noise abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language. In other words, somebody who only spoke Greek sounded like he was speaking Hebrew, or to another person he may have sounded to him like he was speaking Arabic, etc. They were all amazed and marveled and said to one another, behold, are not all of those that speak Galilean? And how do we hear every man in our own tongue wherein we were born? Etc. Now, others were mocking, said that these men were full of new wine. But Peter, standing up with the 11, all 12 apostles are right there. And Peter lifted up his voice and said to them, you men of Judea, and all that dwell in Jerusalem, be it known unto you, and listen to my words. For these are not drunken, as you suppose, seeing, but it is the third hour of the day. But this is that which was spoken of by the prophet Joel. Shall come to pass in the last day, saith Jehovah, that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And on my servants and on my handmaids will I pour out my spirit in those days, and they shall prophesy. Now, Peter could have stopped right there. He could have stopped right there. It would have been enough. But he didn't. And because he didn't, it appears a prediction of timing was made. Remember, do not twist my words around and claim that I made a prediction. I just said it appears this way. I will show wonders in heaven above and signs in the earth beneath, fire, blood, and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before that great and terrible day of Jehovah's wrath come. And then it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call upon the name of Jehovah, you can read, you can look in Joel 2, you can look in Strong's Concordance, you'll see the name Jehovah is sitting right there for you to see, shall be saved. Now, this particular moment right here, well, the sun did turn into darkness, and a day of wrath did come on Jerusalem after the crucifixion. But guess what? This same event is going to occur again, but not on Passover. It appears it's going to happen on Shavuot. This is what I'm pointing out. I said it appears. Once again, let's look at the moon phases. How can the moon be turned to blood, or the whole moon be turned to blood, if Shavuot is on June the 9th? Okay. Well, just take a look at the moon is waxing. And if you read Revelation 6, you will see that an earthquake happens first. And you will see here that the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th, that the moon is full or nearly full, just a few days after. Okay? So we go to let's see, Revelation 6. And I beheld when he had verse 12, I beheld when he opened up the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake. That's the first event. Then the sun became black as sackcloth of hair. There could be a few days after the earthquake. Could be. And the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And then the stars of heaven fell upon the earth, as a fig tree casts her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And heaven departed as a scroll when it was rolled together, and every mountain and coastland out island moved out of their places, and the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and all the bondmen, and every freeman hid themselves and den in the rocks. And they said to the mountains and the rocks, fall upon us and hide us from the face of him that sits on the throne. That would be Jehovah. Remember, it says in Daniel 2 that Elohim, that's the Father, is going to set up a kingdom. Well, he's not going to set up a kingdom in Jerusalem if he's not there. Well, he will be there. His throne will set down in Jerusalem, and they will be running from him, running for their life when they see him. And from the wrath of the Lamb, for great is the day, for the great day of his wrath is come. And who shall be able to stand? So what I'm saying is, it looks like, I'm making no prediction, but it looks like everything is falling into place. So let's watch carefully. Let's watch this coming shadow very carefully. For those of you who don't know what day that is, it is in the Gregorian calendar, June 19, no, I'm sorry, June 9. Like I said, the moon begins waxing, and by the 15th it becomes full or nearly full. And of course, the full moon is actually on the 17th. So we should be expecting what's happened in Europe. They are completely divided. They are in chaos today. Absolute and utter chaos. And the Israeli government, the current Israeli government, is a Roman-styled government. That government should not fare any differently. They should not expect any different, especially when the prime minister breaks his promise concerning the annexation of Judea and Samaria.